let's talk a little bit about what effective interventions with youth in conflict with the law actually look like. And one of the things that we know is that we need special treatment for youth in conflict with the law because compared to adults, youth tend to have a less mature judgment, their brains are still developing, they are more likely to make poor decisions about offending opportunities, they're less likely to recognize the consequences of their behavior, they have poor psychological functioning, reasoning skills. They also can be a little bit more malleable. So while they're less culpable and blameworthy, they're more likely to improve in their levels of culpability. They're more likely to improve their emotional regulation and self-regulation. Their past is not prologue. What we mean by that is that what they've done in the past is not necessarily going to continue in the future because we expect a lot of change in a lot of different ways in terms of morals, in terms of identity. We also know that young persons are not as good at communicating with their lawyers to make legal decisions, so they don't necessarily get the best possible defense. So there are different types of programs or interventions or responses to young persons. And Mark Lipsey is maybe most famous for his work on evaluating or summarizing what we know about the effectiveness of these intervention programs. He did what's called a meta-analysis. In short, a meta-analysis is where there is a statistical summary of past empirical research. So instead of doing a unique study, and instead of just doing a literature review, it's a statistical analysis of the average effect of a particular treatment program across a wide range of studies. So I'm going to show you details on the effectiveness of different programs. In parentheses, you'll see the average reductions in recidivism. Basically, a minus shows that the program is effective and a plus sign shows that the program made things worse. For example, we can look at surveillance. And this would look at, for individuals, young persons that received surveillance, was their likelihood of recidivism lower compared to individuals that did not receive surveillance? So we would randomly assign one youth to surveillance and one youth to non-surveillance. And then we would do this for a large group and then compare the prevalence of recidivism. So surveillance indicates that individuals who experience like surveillance by police officers, by probation officers, remember like that Yankee 10, Yankee 20 cars that I talked about for the policing lecture, about 6% lower rate of recidivism for those that were surveilled compared to those that were not surveilled. As I mentioned, deterrence is actually harmful. Another example of deterrence programs are scared straight programs. So if we randomly assign 50 individuals to a scared straight program, and for a random 50 individuals we do nothing, the group that received nothing is less likely to recidivate compared to the individuals exposed to the scared straight program. So having former persons who have experienced incarceration or currently incarcerated adults yelling and screaming at young persons about how awful prison is actually harmful. It will actually increase the likelihood that these young persons will recidivate. Discipline, I wouldn't really call them like boot camps. I think more about discipline as like wilderness training programs that are trying to have the young person follow a really stringent schedule and get used to routine. The problem with these like wilderness training camps or wilderness awareness camps is that they provide the young person with very strict structure, but in very controlled conditions. It's very easy to follow a routine when you don't really have an option to deviate from that routine. Like if you're being forced to wake up at 6 a.m. every day and have breakfast at 7 and shower at 7:30. Like if you're being forced to follow that routine, you kind of don't have a choice to deviate from that routine. What happens is when the young person is taken out of that training program and placed back in their family home that's very chaotic and they have to work on getting themselves to school and there's like they don't get the sleep that they need because parents are up late at night drinking or using drugs or there are different people coming in and out of the house. It's harder to have the agency to maintain that routine that you've been taught. Where these wilderness training programs can be effective is if the young person, when returned to the family home, gets treatment, gets counseling in addition, so that they are better able to put the skills that they learned into practice in this more chaotic environment. Restorative programs include both restitution and mediation. Restitution is more about giving back. Mediation is more about resolving the conflict, and mediation is a little bit more effective than restitution-based restorative programs. Overall, restorative programs are quite successful. I'd argue that we have to be careful about who we use restorative programs for. For an individual with strong features of psychopathy, they might use this restorative program to try and inflict further harm on an individual. Restorative programs don't need to be restricted to persons that have committed only non-serious offenses. Counseling is a pretty broad term. There are a lot of different types of counseling. We can have one-to-one counseling that's referred to individual counseling, or also group-based counseling. For adults, we tend to maybe see individual counseling being particularly effective, not so much for youth. The group aspect of counseling for youth might be useful for two reasons. The first is that youth really want to spend a lot of time with friends and with peers, so they might be more amenable to attending counseling and paying attention and listening because there are also young persons there that they can socialize with. What group counseling can also do is normalize the problems that young persons are going through. Because I think that young persons would be much more apprehensive or nervous about them being different from their peers. They want to fit in, but they're going to counseling because of this, what they think is a unique problem. But when they learn that other young persons, their same age, same background, are going through the same things, can kind of be helpful in letting them know that, hey, you're not alone in this. That doesn't make you totally abnormal. There are other people that are struggling with this, and maybe that helps motivate the young person to attend and participate. So lastly, I'll talk about skill building programs as an overarching type of program. It's meant to provide instruction and practice incentives aimed at helping the young person develop control over their behavior and their ability to participate in normative pro-social activities. So it's not just like job training, it's more like social training, especially because a lot of these young persons have often not had an opportunity to have pro-social interactions with other people because they come from a very negative family environment or they have a very negative peer group. So they don't necessarily get opportunities to practice compromise or pro-social interactions. So these programs provide an outlet and an opportunity for this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, while a type of counseling, is not just counseling, it's also skill building because it goes through different scenarios and gets the individual receiving the counseling to practice how they would engage or interact with a particular person in a particular scenario. So it changes those neural pathways of, okay, normally if somebody cut you off in traffic or brushed by you in school, you would react very negatively and you would push them or you'd get out of your car to initiate a fight. So let's acknowledge that this is what makes you particularly upset. There are specific circumstances in your environment that make you feel very disrespected. Let's not worry about violence in general. Let's worry about those circumstances that lead to you being violent.